A dark and stormy night. The storm had come out of nowhere. The skies, once clear, were now dark and heavy with clouds, as if the heavens themselves were angry. The wind howled through the empty streets of the alien city, rattling windows and knocking over crates. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching everything it touched. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the electric buzz of an impending thunderstorm. Alex pulled his jacket tighter around his body as he hurried down the deserted street, his boots splashing through puddles with each step. He had been walking for what felt like hours, but the rain and the darkness made it hard to tell just how far he'd come. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows across the alleyways. He had never liked being out in storms, but this one felt different, strangely oppressive, almost like something was about to happen. Alex was a soldier, but tonight he wasn't on a mission. He wasn't here to fight. He was just walking home after another long day of training and trying to forget the horrors of war that still haunted him. The battlefields, the blood, the constant danger, everything had been so overwhelming. Sometimes it felt like he was running from something, but he didn't know what. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound, soft but clear above the pounding rain. A faint cry, a voice calling for help. Alex froze in his tracks. The sound wasn't far off, coming from an alley to his left. His heart skipped a beat. He knew he should keep walking, mind his business, but something in him couldn't ignore it. The voice sounded so helpless, so vulnerable, like a plea from someone who needed saving. Curious and cautious, Alex slowly approached the alley. He stayed close to the wall, listening carefully, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. It wasn't that he expected trouble, but in a strange city on a strange planet, anything was possible. As he rounded the corner, his eyes scanned the dark alley, looking for the source of the sound. He saw nothing at first. Then, through the rain and the shadows, he spotted her, a young alien girl, no older than 15, crouched in the corner of the alley, her body hunched against the wall. Her greenish skin was slick with rainwater, and her large eyes were wide with fear. She was shivering, her thin frame trembling violently from the cold. Her long, dark hair clung to her face, and her clothes were torn and soaked through. She looked like she hadn't had a proper meal in days, let alone a safe place to stay. Alex hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had been trained to face danger head-on, to fight and survive. But standing in front of him was a girl, an alien, yes, but a girl all the same. And she was in need of help. He approached her cautiously, his voice low but gentle. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, his accent thick with the weight of his experiences. He didn't expect her to understand, but somehow she looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. There was no understanding between them, not yet. But there was something in her gaze, something desperate, that told him she needed help. The girl flinched when he took a step closer, but she didn't run. Instead, she looked down at the ground, her head shaking slightly. She seemed too weak to even speak, and Alex felt a pang of sympathy in his chest. This wasn't just some alien encounter. This was a young girl in need of help, stuck in a dangerous storm on a strange world. Without thinking, Alex took off his jacket and draped it over her small shoulders. The rain had soaked through his own clothes, but he didn't care. She needed it more than he did. She looked up at him in surprise, her large eyes filled with both fear and confusion. She didn't seem to know what to make of his kindness, but for the first time since he had found her, she stopped trembling quite so much. "Come on," Alex said softly, trying to sound comforting. "We can't stay here. It's too dangerous." The girl didn't resist. In fact, she barely moved. Her body seemed like it had given up, like the weight of the world had finally taken its toll. Alex gently took her by the arm and helped her stand. She was weak, so much weaker than he had expected. Her steps were unsteady, and she nearly collapsed a few times, but Alex held her up, guiding her through the downpour. As they walked, Alex couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. Was she lost? Had she been abandoned? He didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just leave her out here. The city was dangerous, especially in weather like this, and who knew what else could be lurking in the shadows. They made their way down the alley and onto the main street, where the rain had started to let up just a little. Alex found a small, abandoned building nearby and led the girl inside. The roof was mostly intact, though the walls were cracked and broken in places. But it was dry, and that was all that mattered. Alex helped the girl sit down against the wall. She didn't speak, but she looked up at him with those large, glowing eyes that seemed to hold so many secrets. As he knelt beside her, trying to catch his breath from the journey, he couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening. This wasn't just an ordinary rescue. There was something more to this encounter, something he couldn't yet understand. And as the storm raged outside, he had the oddest sense that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. The girl, still shivering but no longer as afraid, met his gaze. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. And in that quiet, stormy night, Alex knew this was just the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The unexpected act of kindness. Alex's mind raced as he helped the alien girl into the abandoned building, her weak form leaning heavily against him. The rain still pounded on the roof, but here, at least, they were sheltered. He could hear the soft sound of her breathing, shallow but steady, as she sat down against the cracked wall. Her large, glowing eyes stared at him with a mixture of confusion and fear. There was something about her, something fragile in her demeanor that tugged at his heart. This wasn't just some alien encounter. This was a human moment, raw and real, where survival meant more than just fighting battles. He crouched beside her, taking in her features more closely. Her skin was a pale shade of green, her hair dark and matted with rain, and her face was delicate, almost childlike. But there was no mistaking the depth of her eyes. Despite her vulnerability, there was a strength in them, a fire that seemed to burn deep within her, even though her body was exhausted and frail. Alex knew this wasn't just any alien girl. She had a story, a life, a purpose that was still hidden from him. He needed to know more, but for now, he focused on making sure she was okay. "Here," Alex said, pulling a small thermal blanket from his pack and wrapping it around her shoulders. "You'll feel better once you're warm." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Alex wondered if she even understood him. The language barrier was a huge problem, but he didn't care. Actions spoke louder than words. With his help, the girl shifted, wrapping the blanket around her body more securely. She seemed to relax a little, but the fear in her eyes never fully disappeared. Alex thought about offering her food or water, but his rations were limited. Instead, he just sat next to her, offering what little comfort he could through his presence. Minutes passed in silence. The storm outside began to calm, but the tension between them lingered. Alex found himself watching her, trying to piece together her story. How did she end up here? And why had she been alone in the storm, shivering and vulnerable? "Where are you from?" Alex asked quietly, though he wasn't sure she'd understand. He didn't expect an answer, but the question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. To his surprise, she looked at him, her wide eyes focused intently on his face. She seemed to study him for a moment, almost like she was weighing whether to trust him. Then, after a long pause, she raised a trembling hand and pointed at the ground, then to the sky, her finger tracing an invisible path. Alex blinked, unsure what she meant. He followed her gestures, but they made no sense to him. The girl seemed to sense his confusion and dropped her hand, looking down at the ground. Her face seemed to tighten with frustration, and Alex felt a pang of sympathy. She was trying to communicate, but the words were lost in the vast gap between their worlds. Then, with a sudden movement, The girl reached into the pouch tied around her waist and pulled out something small and glowing, a crystal. Alex watched in fascination as the object emitted a soft, steady light, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The glow was soothing, almost hypnotic, and the moment she held it out to him, Alex felt an inexplicable pull toward it. "Is this yours?" he asked softly, reaching out to take the crystal from her. As soon as his fingers brushed against it, a strange energy surged through his hand, sharp and electric, as if the crystal itself was alive. The girl flinched back, her expression filled with a mix of awe and fear. She quickly pulled the crystal away, holding it close to her chest, as if it were precious. But Alex couldn't shake the sensation that something important was tied to this object. It was more than just a simple artifact. It was something far more powerful, something that connected them in ways he couldn't yet understand. "Sorry," Alex murmured, not sure what to say. He hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable. The girl gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging his apology, but she didn't relax. Instead, she clutched the crystal even tighter, her gaze dropping to the ground. There was a long silence between them, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like two strangers, each lost in their own world, but connected by something neither of them could explain. Alex tried to process the strange encounter, the girl, the crystal, the sudden surge of energy. His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of it all. She was from a far-off world, perhaps even a distant galaxy, and somehow they had crossed paths in the most unlikely of ways. As the moments passed, Alex found himself wondering if he had done the right thing by helping her. He was a soldier, trained for combat, not for rescuing aliens in the rain. He didn't know her, didn't understand her, and yet he felt something inside him stir, an undeniable sense of responsibility. He wasn't sure what this was, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to leave her alone. The girl shifted slightly, as if she had made a decision. She raised her head, meeting Alex's gaze with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. There was something in her eyes. A story, a secret, an invitation. Without saying a word, she handed him the crystal once more, this time pressing it into his palm with a sense of urgency. Alex took it cautiously, still feeling the powerful energy radiating from the crystal. The moment he grasped it, he felt a rush of warmth flood through him, unlike anything he had ever experienced. For a fleeting second, he saw images, flashes of distant stars, alien landscapes, and the faces of beings who were not human. But then, as quickly as it came, the vision vanished. He looked at the girl, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What is this?" he asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper. She simply nodded, her eyes never leaving his. It was as if she was telling him to trust the crystal, to trust her. The air between them felt charged with meaning, like a secret was just within reach, waiting to be uncovered. The storm outside had finally stopped, but the real storm, the one that would change everything, was just beginning. A mysterious connection. The silence in the abandoned building stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of water dripping from the roof. The storm had subsided, leaving only the smell of wet earth and the sound of the occasional wind gust that rattled the old structure. But in that quiet space, something unspoken seemed to hang in the air, thick and charged with tension. Alex glanced down at the glowing crystal still resting in his palm. It felt warm against his skin, almost alive in its energy. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he knew one thing for sure. It was important. The girl, still wrapped in the thermal blanket, sat silently beside him. She hadn't said a word since he took the crystal, her large, glowing eyes never leaving him. There was an unspoken understanding between them, something deeper than mere survival or circumstance. It was as if they were connected by some invisible thread, drawing them together in ways neither could fully comprehend. Alex shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing with questions. What was this crystal? Why had the girl chosen him to carry it? And more importantly, Why did he feel such a strange pull toward her? A connection he couldn't explain. The answer seemed to be just out of reach, like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. You don't speak English, do you? Alex asked, his voice tentative as he turned to look at her. She didn't respond, but the way her eyes locked onto his face made it feel as if she understood every word. The look in her eyes was not one of confusion or fear anymore, but one of understanding, like she was waiting for him to figure it out. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was more than just a chance encounter. There was something in the way she looked at him, as if she knew something he didn't, something that transcended language. It was as though the girl, despite her vulnerability, held the key to an entire mystery, and he was the one who had stumbled upon it. The girl suddenly shifted, pulling herself up slightly, the blanket shifting around her shoulders. She reached into her pouch again, this time pulling out something else, a small metallic device that looked like a piece of technology from a different world. It was sleek, with faint markings etched across its surface, glowing softly in the dim light of the abandoned building. Alex blinked in surprise as she held it out to him. "What's this?" Alex asked, though he wasn't expecting an answer. The girl didn't respond verbally, but her eyes said everything. She wanted him to take it, to understand it. He hesitated but then took the device from her hands. The moment his fingers brushed against it, a soft hum filled the air, vibrating through his fingertips and traveling up his arm. The sensation wasn't unpleasant, but it was definitely unsettling, like something was trying to communicate with him directly. He gripped the device more firmly, and suddenly, a series of symbols appeared on the surface, glowing brightly. The symbols were unlike anything Alex had ever seen, strange shapes and lines that didn't make sense at first. The girl watched him intently, her gaze never wavering. As Alex studied the glowing symbols, a realization began to form in his mind. The symbols weren't just random. They were a language, a message, perhaps. The device wasn't just technology. It was a key, a translator, something that could bridge the gap between their two worlds. Without thinking, Alex activated the device. The symbols flickered, rearranging themselves in a way that almost seemed to make sense. A series of words appeared in a language that Alex could understand, though the letters and words weren't English. They were somehow familiar, as if the device was adapting to his brain, translating the language into something his mind could comprehend. "Help." The first word blinked on the screen. Alex's heart skipped a beat. The next series of symbols came up. Humanity, last hope. The girl looked up at him, her expression serious, as if waiting for him to process the information. Alex swallowed hard. What was she trying to say? What was she trying to show him? A cold shiver ran down his spine as the device continued to display the cryptic message. "Our planet, gone. Your people, the key." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with something unspoken. Alex's hands trembled slightly as he read the words. He glanced up at the girl, searching her face for any hint of what this meant. Her eyes were still locked on him, glowing softly in the dim light, as if urging him to understand. "Wait," Alex muttered, trying to make sense of it all. "Are you saying that humanity is the key to saving your people?" His voice was shaky, a mixture of disbelief and realization. The girl nodded, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. Alex's mind raced. This wasn't just about a random alien girl seeking shelter. This was about something far bigger. Her people, whoever they were, had lost everything. And now they believed humanity could save them. But how? What did they mean by the key? And why had she come all this way to find him? Before he could ask any more questions, the device beeped, and the symbols changed again, this time showing an image, a map. The map was unlike anything Alex had ever seen before. It didn't look like any world he knew, not even the alien planet they were currently on. It was an entirely new star system, with multiple planets marked in red. One planet in particular stood out, Its surface was blackened, scorched, as if it had been destroyed. The girl pointed to the map, her finger tracing the red-marked planet. Her eyes were wide with urgency, and Alex could see the fear and hope fighting for dominance in her expression. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was a race against time. Something had happened to her people, and now she had come to find humanity. To find him. Alex stood up, his mind reeling. You want me to go there? To that planet? He pointed at the map, feeling the weight of the question pressing down on him. You want me to help save your people? The girl nodded again, more firmly this time. There was no hesitation in her movements. This was her mission, and now it had become his too. They were connected, not by chance, but by something deeper, something destined. As the reality of the situation sank in, Alex took a deep breath. He didn't know how he could help, or what exactly he was getting into, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away. Not now. The stakes were too high, and the girl, this strange, fragile alien, was placing her faith in him. He glanced down at the glowing device, then back at the girl. Her eyes, full of determination and fear, stared up at him. She wasn't asking for rescue anymore. She was asking for partnership. And in that moment, Alex realized he wasn't just saving a life. He was standing at the edge of something far greater, a future that would demand every ounce of his courage, his strength, and his humanity. The alien's secret. Alex sat there, his mind racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened so far. The girl's words, though unspoken, were clear in his mind. Humanity, the last hope for her people. The glowing crystal, the strange device with the symbols that had somehow communicated more than just words. And now, the map that had revealed a planet on the brink of destruction. Every moment felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of two worlds rested on his shoulders. The girl sat quietly beside him, her eyes focused on the device in his hand, as though she knew the answers he was searching for were hidden within it. Her expression was calm, but Alex could feel the underlying urgency. She had come for a reason, and that reason was far greater than just survival. There was something she wasn't telling him. Something deeper, something that might change everything. He turned to look at her, studying her face in the dim light. "What's your name?" he asked softly, the question almost feeling trivial in the grand scheme of everything that was happening. But it felt important. She had already shared so much, but her identity remained a mystery. The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. She seemed to be gathering the courage to speak, though the language barrier still loomed between them. Finally, she lifted her hand and placed it gently over her chest. With a slight bow of her head, she closed her eyes as if to offer some unspoken reverence. "Isha," she said, her voice faint but clear. The word wasn't like any human name Alex had ever heard, but there was a beauty in it, an alien sound that felt like it belonged in the very fabric of the universe. Isha. Alex repeated the name softly, trying to commit it to memory. There was something in her voice that made him believe she wasn't just sharing her name out of courtesy. This was a moment of trust, a moment where she was letting him into her world, something far deeper than just the surface of an alien encounter. "Isha," Alex said again, this time with a sense of respect. She smiled faintly, a small but genuine curve of her lips. It was the first time since they'd met that she seemed to relax, just a little. But the smile faded quickly, replaced by a look of sadness and determination. Her gaze returned to the glowing map, her finger tracing the red-marked planet once again. Alex followed her eyes, wondering what it was that had caused her people's destruction. There was a story here, one that she had been too afraid to tell. But the weight of the situation was pressing in on them both. Time was running out. "You're not just here to find help, are you?" Alex asked, sensing that there was more to this than a simple rescue mission. Aisha's eyes widened, and for a moment, Alex could see something in her face, a flicker of fear, of regret. It was as if she had been holding something back, something crucial that she had yet to share. She stood up slowly, still wrapped in the thermal blanket, and walked toward the far side of the room. Alex watched her movements, curious and concerned. She paused by a cracked window, peering out into the night. Her eyes seemed distant, lost in thought, as if she were seeing something far beyond the storm that still raged outside. Isha took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling as though she was preparing herself to speak. When she turned back to face Alex, her expression was one of resolve, but there was an underlying sadness in her gaze. "My people, we were once a thriving civilization," she began, her voice quiet but filled with a weight that made Alex's heart tighten. "We lived on a planet far from here, a place where peace and harmony ruled. We believed we were invincible, but we were wrong." Alex leaned forward, his mind fully focused on her words. This was it, the moment when everything would be revealed. "A long time ago," she continued, "we made contact with another species, a race of beings who promised us power and technology beyond our wildest dreams. They told us they could help us achieve greatness, that we could rule the stars. But we were blind. We didn't see the truth." Alex's brow furrowed. What truth? Isha's eyes darkened, and her voice trembled slightly as she spoke the next words. "They were not allies. They were conquerors. The species we trusted betrayed us, and in a single night they wiped out our cities, our homes. They destroyed everything we held dear. They killed millions of us." Alex's breath caught in his throat. This was worse than he had imagined. Isha wasn't just a survivor of some random attack. She was one of the last of a once great civilization, devastated by the very beings they had trusted. The weight of that knowledge hit Alex like a punch to the chest. We fled. My people scattered across the stars, seeking refuge wherever we could. But the enemy followed us, relentless in their pursuit. They destroyed our worlds, one by one, until only a handful of us remained. I am one of the last of my kind." Alex stood up, his mind reeling. He had never imagined the stakes were this high. He had been expecting a simple rescue mission, a chance encounter in the rain. But now he understood the true gravity of the situation. Isha wasn't just asking for help. She was offering a chance at survival for her entire species. "Isha," Alex started, his voice filled with both sympathy and awe. "How can I help? How can humanity be the key to stopping this?" Isha looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and hope. "My people have searched for humans for a reason. There is something unique about your species. You are unlike any other we've encountered. You have a resilience, a strength, that we have not seen in other races. Your capacity for survival, for innovation, it's unparalleled." Alex shook his head, not understanding. "But how does that help you?" Isha stepped closer to him, holding up the glowing crystal, now pulsing softly with light. "This crystal is the last of its kind. It holds the key to a weapon, one that could turn the tide in this war. But it requires a human mind, someone with the creativity and determination to unlock its power. That's why I came to you. You are the one who can help us defeat them." The realization hit Alex like a wave. He had always known that humanity's greatest strength was in its will to survive, to adapt, and to fight back. But now, for the first time, he saw how that resilience could change the fate of an entire species. "This crystal," he said, looking at it with newfound reverence, "it's a weapon, and it needs a human to activate it." Isha nodded, her eyes steady. "You are the last hope, Alex. The last hope for both your people and mine." As the words sank in, Alex's heart raced. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't signed up for a cosmic war. But in that moment, with the fate of an entire civilization resting on his shoulders, he understood. He couldn't turn away now. Not when the stakes were this high. The room felt colder now, the weight of the situation pressing in on him. But as Alex looked at Isha, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting for the survival of an entire species, and he wouldn't let them down. a growing bond. The weight of the situation was undeniable, and the room felt smaller, heavier, as the truth of Isha's words settled around them like a storm cloud. The universe was vast, and yet here they were, two strangers from completely different worlds, brought together by fate, standing at the crossroads of survival and annihilation. As the minutes ticked by in silence, the realization of what had just been revealed hung between them like an unspoken promise. Humanity had become more than just a last hope for her people. It had become their salvation. And Alex, a simple soldier in the vast expanse of space, had just been handed the responsibility to help her unlock that salvation. Alex leaned back against the wall, the glowing crystal still in his hand. It hummed with a strange energy, almost like it was alive, resonating with an ancient power he could barely comprehend. He looked at Aisha, who stood by the window now, gazing out into the vast, rain-soaked night. The storm had passed, but a chill still lingered in the air, one that wasn't just from the weather. She was so different from him. Her skin, a soft greenish hue, shimmered faintly in the dim light of the room. Her eyes, so large, so expressive, seemed to carry the weight of a history Alex could never fully understand. And yet, in that moment, something between them had changed. She wasn't just an alien anymore. She was more than that. She was someone who had suffered, someone who had lost everything and had come to him, of all people, for help. Alex let out a slow breath, pushing himself off the wall and crossing the room to stand next to her. She didn't look at him, but he could sense the depth of her thoughts, her silent struggles. She had trusted him with the truth, her people's history, their tragedy, and the fragile hope that humanity could turn the tide in their favor. That trust was something Alex hadn't expected, something he couldn't take lightly. Isha, Alex said quietly, his voice carrying the sincerity that matched the gravity of the situation. She turned to face him, her eyes locking with his, as though waiting for him to continue. You didn't have to come here. You didn't have to trust me. But you did. I need you to know, I'm not going to let you down. Whatever happens, we're in this together now. The words came out before he could even stop them, an instinctive response to the connection he was beginning to feel with her. A connection that, though born of desperation, had already started to shape into something more, something stronger. Isha didn't speak immediately, but her gaze softened, her lips curling into the smallest of smiles, the kind that conveyed more than words could ever say. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The depth of her simple reply hit him harder than anything she had said so far. She trusted him. She was willing to put the fate of her people in his hands, even if he had no idea what to do next. The silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy or uncomfortable. It felt like an understanding, a silent agreement that they would face whatever came together. In that moment, Alex knew something else. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He wasn't just doing this because it was the right thing. He was doing it because of her, because she had placed her faith in him, and because, somehow, he had begun to place his faith in her as well. Isha's eyes flickered toward the door, then back to Alex. There was something in her gaze now, an urgency that had not been there before. We can't stay here for long, she said, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of her words. The enemy will find us soon. They always do. Alex nodded, feeling the tension rise in the air once more. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They weren't safe here, and the clock was ticking. Isha had no illusions about the danger they were in. The enemy, whoever they were, would not stop until they had found her. Where do we go? Alex asked, his mind already racing ahead. He wasn't sure where to start, but he knew one thing. They needed to move, and fast. They couldn't stay on this planet. If they did, they would be sitting ducks. Isha turned, her movements fluid and purposeful as she walked toward the far corner of the room, where a series of maps and star charts were pinned to the wall. She pointed to one of the maps, her finger hovering over a cluster of stars in a distant part of the galaxy. Alex squinted at the markings, trying to make sense of the alien language written there. "There," she said softly, "is where we need to go. The coordinates are hidden, encoded in the crystal. It's the last place they would expect us to go." Alex leaned in, studying the map more closely. The stars were unfamiliar, but there was something about Aisha's confidence that made him trust her judgment. This was where they would find the answers, or at least where they would have a chance at surviving. "You're sure?" Alex asked, glancing at her again. "Unsure," she replied, her voice unwavering. There was no hesitation in her tone, no second-guessing. She had made up her mind. Alex felt a surge of admiration for her strength, for her determination. It was clear now that Aisha wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, even if she didn't fully see herself that way yet, and she was going to need his help to see this mission through. He glanced down at the glowing crystal in his hand. The pulsing light seemed to flicker in response, as if it was urging them forward. Alex could feel the weight of it now, not just as a tool, but as a symbol of their shared journey. Together, they would face whatever came next. "I'll get us there," Alex said, more to himself than to Aisha. "We'll find a way. I'll keep you safe. I promise." Aisha didn't say anything, but the quiet understanding between them spoke volumes. They were no longer just two individuals caught in a dangerous world. They were partners, bound by a shared purpose, a purpose that was bigger than both of them. And as they prepared to leave the safety of the building and step back into the unknown, Alex knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The bond between them had already started to grow, and with it, so had their hope. A dangerous encounter. The moment Alex and Aisha decided to leave the relative safety of the abandoned building, a chill of foreboding swept over them. The city outside, once quiet and abandoned, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Every step they took through the rain-soaked streets seemed to echo louder than it should, as if the very world around them was waiting for something, waiting for the enemy to find them. Alex kept his senses sharp, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sidearm, though he knew it was unlikely to do much against what they were facing. Aisha, on the other hand, walked with a calmness that unsettled him. She had seen war, perhaps more than he could imagine. The way she moved, her gaze scanning every corner and shadow, showed a lifetime of surviving danger. It was clear she wasn't just a survivor of destruction. She was a warrior in her own right. They made their way through the narrow streets, moving quickly but cautiously, blending into the darkness as best they could. The rain had begun again, falling in soft sheets that muffled their footsteps, but there was no hiding from what was to come. Alex could feel it in the air, a tension that had settled like a storm cloud. It wasn't long before his instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. "Stay close," Alex murmured to Aisha, his voice low. She didn't need to be told twice. She stepped closer, her presence reassuring, but Alex couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched. The city around them seemed deserted, but Alex knew better. The enemy could be anywhere, lurking in the shadows. As they turned a corner, Alex froze. His instincts screamed at him to stop, to take cover, but it was too late. A group of alien soldiers appeared from the misty darkness ahead, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, their forms barely visible through the rain. Aisha's face went pale, but her stance shifted instantly. It was as if she had already anticipated this. She didn't panic. Instead, she moved with quiet purpose, stepping slightly in front of Alex, her hand reaching into her pouch for something. Alex instinctively stepped back, positioning himself between Aisha and the soldiers, trying to shield her. He wasn't sure what to do, but he knew one thing: they couldn't afford to get caught. The soldiers were clearly not human. They stood taller than Alex, their limbs long and angular, their faces obscured by helmets that seemed to absorb the dim light around them. They wore heavy, dark armor, and their weapons, sleek, deadly, were pointed directly at them. Alex didn't need to be told to run. He was already calculating their options, but there weren't many. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Isha. Alex hissed under his breath. Can you fight? Do you have any weapons? Isha gave him a brief glance, her face hardening with a resolve Alex hadn't seen before. She nodded, her fingers closing around something small, metallic, and glowing. She quickly activated it, revealing a weapon that looked like nothing Alex had ever seen, a hybrid between a blade and a plasma gun, glowing with an ethereal blue light. The hum of energy from it vibrated through the air, and for a moment, Alex felt both awe and terror in the same breath. This was beyond anything he was prepared for. I'm not going down without a fight, Isha said, her voice quiet but deadly serious. She turned to face the soldiers, her eyes narrowing as she took a step forward, her weapon raised. The soldiers didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their cold, calculating eyes made it clear that they were here for one reason only, to capture Isha and eliminate anyone who got in their way. But there was something else in their eyes. Recognition. The sight of the crystal in Aisha's hand seemed to trigger something in them. They hesitated, just for a moment, before their leader stepped forward. You cannot escape, the leader said, his voice distorted by the helmet, but the words were clear enough. The girl belongs to us. Alex's blood ran cold. He didn't know who these aliens were, but it was obvious they were powerful, dangerous, and determined. He wasn't about to let them take Isha, though. Not without a fight. With a quick glance at Isha, Alex made a split-second decision. He dove behind a nearby barrel for cover as the soldiers fired their weapons. The sound of energy blasts filled the air, and Alex's heart raced. He could feel the heat of the blasts, even from behind cover, and the air around him crackled with the intensity of their fire. The soldiers were relentless, their aim precise, but they hadn't counted on Aisha's speed. Isha was a blur of motion. She moved with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural, her weapon flashing in the dim light as she deflected their energy blasts with ease. Her eyes were focused, her movements calculated. It was clear that she had fought before, many times. Her skill was nothing short of impressive, and Alex couldn't help but be amazed at how easily she handled the enemy. But it wasn't enough. The soldiers were closing in, and their numbers were too great. Alex knew they needed a way out, and fast. As he ducked behind cover, he spotted something that might just give them the edge they needed. A narrow alleyway just to the left, hidden from the soldiers' line of sight. Isha, Alex shouted. The alley. We need to move now. Without waiting for a response, Alex sprinted toward the alley, hoping Isha was close behind. He didn't dare look back, but he could hear the sound of her footsteps, steady and purposeful, as she followed him. The soldiers shouted orders behind them, but their pursuit was slower, less certain now that they were moving in a confined space. The narrow alleyway led them to another set of streets, and Alex took a sharp turn, keeping his back to the wall, trying to keep a low profile. His heart was pounding in his chest, adrenaline pumping through his veins. They had made it out for now, but Alex knew they couldn't stop running. They were still being hunted. As they rounded another corner, Alex slowed, panting heavily. We have to keep moving, he said, his voice low. They're not going to stop until they have you. We need to get to the ship now. Isha didn't argue. Her face was grim, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. She knew the stakes better than anyone. Let's go, she said, her voice steady. They won't catch us. Not yet. But as they continued to move through the city, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their luck was running out. The enemy had come too close. They were relentless, and the storm they were running from had only just begun. A new beginning. The city's streets seemed to close in on them, a maze of alleys and shadows that offered no refuge from the relentless pursuit. But as the sounds of their footsteps echoed in the distance, a flicker of hope began to light the darkened path ahead. Despite the odds, Alex and Isha had made it this far, and they weren't going to stop now. Alex's heart pounded as they ran. His breath ragged from the sprint. His mind raced ahead, trying to calculate their next move. The soldiers were still out there, hunting them, but they had managed to slip away for now. The enemy had underestimated their speed, their resourcefulness. But Alex knew that wouldn't last long. Every moment they stayed in the city was a risk. He had to get Isha to safety, and fast. Isha. He called, glancing over his shoulder to make sure she was still with him. She was, of course. Her resolve was as strong as ever, her eyes set forward, determined. The glow of the city lights cast fleeting shadows across her face, but it was the intensity of her gaze that Alex noticed most. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for a future, for a chance to save her people. "We're almost there," Alex said, though he wasn't entirely sure of where there was. His mind had turned into a blur of calculations, his instincts guiding him through the streets, looking for an escape route, a hidden door, anything that could give them a way out. They couldn't keep running forever. As they turned another corner, Alex's eyes locked onto something in the distance, a glimmer of light through a narrow gap between buildings. It was faint, but it was enough to catch his attention. His heart skipped a beat. It was a ship, a small, sleek vessel, tucked away in the shadows, hidden from view. "That's it," Alex said, his voice full of urgency. "That's our way out." Isha didn't need any more convincing. She picked up her pace, her steps light and quick, like she had been running her entire life. Alex followed closely, pushing himself harder than he ever thought he could. The sounds of the city seemed to fade away as they neared the ship, but his mind kept alert, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the enemy. This wasn't over yet. As they reached the ship, Alex quickly assessed the situation. It was small, clearly not designed for a large crew, but it was functional. It had to be. He could see the control panels inside through the small window. Everything was intact. The ship was ready to go. He turned to Aisha, who had already moved to the hatch, her fingers flying over the keypad with practiced ease. Alex had no idea how she knew how to operate the ship, but he wasn't about to question it. She was the expert here, and he trusted her with every step. The hatch hissed open, and Isha slid inside, motioning for Alex to follow. He didn't hesitate. He climbed in after her, the door closing behind them with a satisfying click. The interior was cramped, but there was just enough room for them to maneuver. The soft hum of the engine came to life as Isha took her place at the controls, her fingers moving with a precision that made Alex realize just how much she had been through. This wasn't just a ship to her, it was a lifeline, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Alex took a seat beside her, his mind racing as the ship's engines began to roar to life. He had no idea how long they had before the enemy found them, but he knew they couldn't waste time. He turned to Aisha, meeting her gaze, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something that had been missing all along, a spark of hope. "Are you ready?" he asked. Isha nodded, her face determined. "We don't have a choice." Alex nodded back, feeling the surge of confidence. He had no idea what lay ahead, no idea how they were going to stop the enemy or how they could save her people. But in this moment, none of that mattered. The path ahead was unclear, but they were in this together. And that was enough. As the ship lifted off the ground, the city's lights began to fade into the distance, replaced by the vast emptiness of space. The stars were a breathtaking sight, stretching out in every direction, a never-ending sea of possibilities. For a brief moment, Alex felt the weight of everything lift from his shoulders. The danger, the uncertainty, they were still there, but for the first time since meeting Aisha, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually make it. Isha's voice broke through his thoughts. "The crystal," she said softly, her hand resting on the glowing object in her lap. It pulsed softly, its light steady and reassuring. "We have to decode it, Alex. The key to saving my people. It's in here." Alex looked at her, a sense of determination growing within him. They weren't just running anymore. They were headed toward something important, something that could change the course of both their worlds. The crystal wasn't just a weapon, it was the answer. And together, they were going to unlock it. "We'll figure it out," Alex said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We're not alone in this, Aisha. We have each other. We can do this." Isha looked at him then, her expression softening ever so slightly. She nodded, and for a brief moment, the weight of her entire species' survival didn't seem so heavy anymore. There was something in the air between them now, something solid, something they could both hold on to. It wasn't just the mission. It wasn't just the crystal. It was the bond they had formed, the unspoken understanding that they were a team now. And that was the first step toward winning the war. As the ship sped through the atmosphere, heading toward the unknown reaches of space, Alex allowed himself to relax for a moment, to believe that perhaps this journey, this partnership, was the beginning of something greater than either of them had imagined. They were no longer just running from the enemy. They were running toward hope.